Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Today I'm speaking with Yolonda Tonette Sanders. She's an Ohio native whose hometown of Sandusky, Ohio attracts millions of visitors each year because of the Cedar Point amusement park. Upon graduating from high school, Yolonda moved to Columbus, Ohio to attend Capital University, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Criminology and another in Political Science. She continued her education at The Ohio State University, receiving a Master of Arts in Sociology. Yolonda used her education and relational skills to write, publish, and teach in higher education, and to serve in various leadership capacities, including that of CEO, board member, and program director. Most recently, she received a Doctor of Philosophy degree in organizational leadership from Indiana Wesleyan University. I'll note here for listeners that this episode is actually part 3 of a 3-part series on Indiana Wesleyan. So please do go back and listen to parts 1 and 2, which are really fantastic. Yolonda has agreed to share today a little bit about her experience of the PhD program and about her dissertation, which explored connections between followers' emotional intelligence and their followership styles. Dr. Sanders enjoys spending time with loved ones and engaging in endeavors that enhance her personal and spiritual growth and that of others. Yolonda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sharna.
I'd like to start by just asking you to ground listeners by giving them a little sense of what you're doing right now, post-PhD.
Well, post-PhD, I am doing what a lot of graduates do, is saying, where do I go from here? What do I do now? I told my husband last night, I said, I feel like, when people graduate from high school and it's like, well, what are you doing with the rest of your life? Like, that's kind of how I feel right now. And I don't lack a shortage of anything to do. So I would say my main goal, scholarly wise, is, I want to do more research in the area of followership, and particularly followership and emotional intelligence. So I'm working on getting some journal articles together for submission.
Fabulous. I will look forward to reading those. And before we jump into your dissertation, I am really curious to hear that, but I want to back up just a little bit and ask you about your experience in the PhD program, because Indiana Wesleyan is really unique and special in the country. It's, one of the institutions that's really pioneering the study of leadership and followership. And so I wonder, when you encountered that kind of dual lens, was that new for you? Did it feel obvious? Like, how was your first experience with that material?
I began in 2018. I began thinking, I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm going to stay isolated and be by myself. And that's not my nature, but 2017 had been a difficult year for me. I had some devastating losses, family members who have passed away. And then I was grieving. And so I wanted to crawl in my little bubble. And I started at Indiana Wesleyan. And the first thing I noticed is that this program was not going to let me stay isolated. So one of the... So my earliest introduction to followership in general, I believe it was our advanced theory class, but it was the first time I came across that term. And it so resonated to me because I had never been able to verbalize why I ask questions about things, why I'm willing to challenge leaders, why I wonder why other people don't speak up about things. Like I had these conversations,
Yeah.
but I didn't know there was a term for it. And so I just, that really opened my world to, the followership literature. And so I was drawn to it, but I will never forget just feeling like, wow, it was that light bulb moment that goes off, that you see, I really felt like,
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. I love that you're kind of describing this experience as a name for something that you'd felt, like in your own experience for so long. Because as a former dancer, some folks know I'm a former tango dancer. The following role for me, it's always been a positive one, right? But it's very much embodied. It's the role, in dance that moves and that is actually like covers about 3 times more ground. So it's very responsive. And, what I hear you saying is that you always had this impulse to respond to your leaders and engage with them. And now you had a term for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was that validation that, okay, maybe you're not so crazy.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of, aside from like seeing the term in its definition, are there other examples of exercises or like assignments that you did that kind of shaped this thinking and like allowed you to fill out your own definition of the role?
There were several assignments. We had several discussion questions. So when I said that, this program would not allow me to be isolated, the discussion questions required engagement with other students. And then there were assignments, one in particular in that advanced leadership class, advanced leadership theory, where we had to put together a portfolio of different theories. And, I was also drawn to transformation theory, but there was something more that resonated with me about followership than transformational leadership or any of the other leadership theories. And it was a term that we covered in that class, but even, post PhD, as I read other textbooks, followership might receive a paragraph, not a whole chapter. And so I oversee an organizational leadership program. And so I'm always supplementing with followership material because I think it is so important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, let's kind of dive in a little bit to your dissertation. So having had this epiphany moment and getting really curious about it, how did you develop the idea of followership and EQ, or, how did your thinking evolve as you continue to explore followership?
Well, one of the things that I noted, and which other scholars have noted, and you might have as well, is that there is a tendency in the literature to focus on leaders. Followers are overlooked, the contributions that followers make. Well, the same is true with the emotional intelligence literature. Even the pioneers of emotional intelligence, the framing of their concept is always about how can it help leaders engage more followers? How can it help leaders become more productive? And I noticed that with EQ and followership, most of the studies were just about how it helps followers engage more in the workplace, how it improves their workplace behavior. So I had noticed there was a tendency to view EQ and how EQ helps leaders relate to the followers, but I did not see anything where EQ helped followers relate to the leaders. And if you look at the literature in terms, and I'm using, for instance, Kelly coined the term star followership, as the ideal follower. Chalif said courageous follower or a partner. But if you look at those characteristics of these ideal followers, they have characteristics of people with high emotional intelligence. Just to give you an example, Goldman stated that a person with high EQ has a high sense of self-awareness. Well, a star follower has a sense of who they are and what they value, which makes them that star follower. So I just started seeing the connections between EQ and followership, and my research question emerged from there.
I love it. And I want to underline this point for listeners, Yolonda, because I think your research has identified a really important gap in our general understanding. And like all gaps, of course, it sounds really obvious once you say it out loud. If EQ helps leaders relate to followers, then wouldn't we want to ask the reverse question, how does EQ help followers relate to leaders? And lo and behold, as you found, the parallels are so clear. Thank you so much for doing this work. And I want to ask what guidance you might offer to industry experts who are struggling right now with, let's call it the workplace transition, and looking for specific opportunities to improve organizational culture, to improve work experience, and other people metrics.
Well, definitely one of the results of my dissertation was that I did find there was statistical significance between some EQ components and followership. And so particularly the engagement pieces of followership, because using Kelly's model, it's made up of two constructs, the critical thinking and the engagement. And so we know that engaged followers, according to Kellerman, engaged followers are better than disengaged followers, right? Because the disengaged followers, the bystanders, they can be detrimental to an organization because they just allow anything to go without taking part. So definitely organizations should concentrate on building up the emotional intelligence of their followers, because it can increase with engagement. Now, we do know engagement alone doesn't make for star follower behavior, right? Engagement without critical thinking is conformity, which is bad followership when we just conform without having any critical assessment of what's going on. But organizations should do more to build followership and teaching that it's okay to speak up. A lot of times we find people don't speak up because of the consequences. Organizations need to cultivate a culture of star followership, that it is okay to ask questions.
It's so important what you're saying. I want to ask, and you can skip this question if you want, but in any of your own leadership roles in the recent years or now, are there specific ways that you do that for your teams or for the people around you?
For the people whom I lead, I encourage questions. And I say, please don't just take my word for it just because I say this is so. If you have questions, ask. I don't get offended. And if I do, they never know, right? Because that's part of that self-management. Because I want people to feel comfortable asking me questions and challenging me on things. Growing up with my children, we come from a faith-based family. And so I would say to my children growing up, just because I tell you something's in the Bible, I'm not offended if you don't take my word for it. Like, say, Mom, show me. And that's, again, I didn't have a name for it, when I was raising my children, but I'm the same way. And I've seen a lot of people, we have become such a title-driven society that I don't know if you've ever walked into a room and someone introduces themselves and they're the VP or president or something, and everybody's like, people are impressed by the title, and you don't even know the fruit of what this person has done. Mm-hmm. And so, I am not a title driven person. I have a PhD, but I can tell you that I do try to cultivate environments where people are not afraid to challenge me, because I am not always right. And this has nothing to do with organizations, but an example, yesterday, I got this idea last week. We have a blank living room wall, and I needed something. I was tired of looking at the blank wall. And so I ordered these picture frames and this large clock hand and this saying, these decals, and they say, time spent with family is worth every second. So, whenever I get these bright ideas, my husband is always looking at me like, oh, okay, this is something for the honeydew. So I was like, I am going to do this so he doesn't have to do it. And so I put it all up and I sent him a picture, and I said, they're not permanently attached yet, because I wanted to wait until you got home to see if you saw anything that was off. Now, my definition was off, like if a frame was maybe in the wrong spot. He said, it's too high. You need to bring it down and center. And as much as I didn't want to, Shauna, I had spent like an hour and a half getting this all together. As much as I didn't want to move anything, here's the thing. I asked. Mm-hmm. Why ask if I'm not going to listen? And so I said, good call. And guess what? It looks better now. I spent another hour or so bringing everything down, but it looks better. So although that's not related to organizations, just in general, we as leaders have to realize that sometimes other people have better ideas. Mm-hmm. We don't have all of the answers.
Yeah. Really important takeaway too. I love that you encourage people to verbalize, if you're in a leadership role, really verbalize to people around you. I want you to speak freely. I want you to give me your ideas, however that makes sense to you in language. And then, following that is the other side, right? The leader has to be willing to, quote, follow, right, when that happens, and demonstrate that they're responding, right? Okay, I did ask you to speak. I, was really clear about that, and you did. And so now I have to respond in kind, right? Either by making a change or by maybe explaining why a change can't be made, or whatever might be appropriate. Really great concrete suggestions. Are there any other specific suggestions you want to offer listeners in terms of making that clear, right, to people that the atmosphere is one of desired speaking up?
I think this is where the responsibility is more on the leader, because you can't have followers who speak up. Mm-hmm. And, followers who speak up, they can feel ignored. I've been in that position as well. The thing about leadership is, just because I might lead in an organization, I'm not a leader in every organization to which I belong, right. So I've been in that position to where I've spoken up and I've spoken up and I've spoken up and I've spoken up, and nothing's changing. And so that's where, as a follower, has to make a decision. Do I continue to support this organization?
Right.
But the responsibility really lies on leaders not to think too highly of yourself. Like, I am one of those people, and this is my own bias. So I can tell you this is my own bias. Whenever someone introduces themselves to me and they make it a point that they have to say their titles, I'm like, that's important to that person.
Mm-hmm.
That's important to that person. Their identity is wrapped up in that. But you have to be someone without a title. Mm-hmm. You know, I might be Dr. Sanders now, but I am still the same quirky person as I was before I became Dr. Sanders. Mm-hmm. I still ask questions. I still encourage questions. So, yeah, I believe leaders have to take that responsibility to say, I am not thinking more highly of myself because of this. And, you know, I have my own quirks that I still need to work out and biases, but, you know, we're all learning.
Yeah, I wonder if you agree with this. I've been sort of kicking around this hypothesis in my own mind for a while that I think because we do organize in titles, right? And that org chart, you know, all the titles are, quote, leadership titles. They're not like, oh, I got promoted and I'm now a higher level follower, right? They're all like, I'm a leader. Because we identify that way. And, you know, for good reason, the hierarchy is functional, you know, most of the time anyway. But I think it creates, or at least reinforces, a sort of bias that we have maybe as humans, you know, as animals toward hierarchy. And if we're not careful, you know, we're not aware of it. We'll just sort of fall into that bias like we fall into many other biases, you know, and think, oh, a vice president, that means they're better, smarter, you know, something. And we forget that they're also like the mom running after their kid, or, you know, we forget that they're like the dad, you know, kind of coaching soccer. Like they're also people, and the title can kind of invisibilize that.
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of the issues that I pointed out in my dissertation, ideas for future research, is to study populations in which the titles are central to how the organization runs. So I studied nonprofit organizations in my research, but there are various types of nonprofit organizations, right? Mm-hmm. So one idea I said was to look at churches, mm-hmm. for example. You Great. Know, we come to a church, and, you know, I'm not, again, I'm a faith-based believer, Christian, all of that. So I'm not knocking churches, but one thing that bothered me my entire life, and I could not put a name to it until I got to Indiana Wesleyan, is why people get into that environment, and because someone's a pastor or someone's a bishop or something, they automatically know more than anyone else. And because this person is a title, has this title, you have to do what that person says. And I never bought into that mentality. And so my first experience with followership, and not knowing it was followership, but my first experience with that was in the church environment, because I'm like, why isn't anyone questioning this? Why is it, you know? And I did not understand. And so I totally agree with your hypothesis, because, you know, then on the other hand, you get people who fall apart when they see a leader, quote unquote, fall from grace. Well, this is because you have put that person, right. You have elevated that person so high, forgetting that that individual is human. So I guess I am not surprised by any faults that people have. And I'm not impressed with their titles. For me, let's see what you're doing with the title you have. So what is that from, is it Spider-Man?
Oh, is it with great power comes great responsibility?
Yeah, there we go. That's the quote. Yes.
It's so refreshing to hear, you know, how this sort of natural sense that you have to not only to question and challenge, but to like see leaders as humans, right, has allowed you to interact with them, you know, in a more productive, equitable way. I'm trying to encourage more of that. So I really appreciate your experience. I wonder if there's anything else from your nonprofit experience or roles or observations you've seen in those sorts of organizations that you'd like to offer in terms of how leadership and followership dynamics can be navigated skillfully.
Well, I will say that the nonprofit organizations to which I belong, for instance, Faith and Fellowship Book Festival, that's we're part of a nonprofit, a 501c3 Mordecai Brown Legacy Foundation. But with the Faith and Fellowship Book Festival, because I was instrumental in building that organization, we have open culture. So it's a co-founder in me and then other committee members. And so, not to speak on behalf of anyone else, but just based on the experiences, I would say that our committee members feel very comfortable telling us when we have an idea that is maybe not going to go over so smoothly. And I appreciate that. So, my goal just for myself is any organization, especially if I am instrumental in building that organization and I've been trusted with a key leadership role, is to cultivate an open environment. And, I say trusted with the leadership role because I do feel that when you're in those kinds of positions, people are placing their trust in you, and so that's just for me personally. And then with other organizations that maybe I have not been a part of building, I seek to cultivate relationships. So one thing I know about myself is I am very much a relationship-oriented person. I will get the tasks done. Don't worry about that. The tasks will get done. I like to understand people. And again, I really wasn't that familiar with emotional intelligence as a concept until I started attending Indiana Wesleyan University. I just knew that I like to try and understand people. And that might come from my sociology background. I have a master's in sociology. I've also written 6 novels that have been traditionally published. And so, I get into the minds of my characters. Mm-hmm. And so I think that training, all of that has helped me try to relate more to people, try to understand them. Understanding doesn't necessarily mean I agree. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean that, I change my mindset. It's just helping me figure out how a person got to a decision or an action, just trying to make sense, putting myself, in their experiences.
We are definitely putting links to your novels in the show notes, Yolanda, and we might need to do a whole other episode on that. But I kind of love that you just dropped that in there because it brings, tell me if I'm getting this right. I feel like it kind of brings leadership and followership, which is a model for relationship, for like equitable relationship building, and EQ all together. Right. So EQ being like a skill set or an ability that allows us to be better partners, better leaders, better followers, which allows us to have stronger relationships, more equitable and generative relationships. So it's sort of, for me, it's kind of like bringing it together here. I wonder if you want to correct that or add anything.
No, I would agree with that. I would also say, part of that emotional intelligence construct is being aware of your own emotions. Mm-hmm. And so in my adulthood, I would say, especially maybe the last decade, I have started really being intentional about processing my own emotions because, Sometimes, for a perfect example, I know someone whose mother is really ill, and the doctors had told her that her mother basically has months. And she goes, it's hard for me to talk to my kids because I don't want to cry. And I said, let them see you cry. It's okay. I'm saying that from personal experience because I was the one who, you have to be strong for everyone else. But then I'm being strong for everyone else. Then what? Right? Then I'm left trying to pick up my own pieces, and sometimes I can't. And so I am learning. And I say learning because it's continual. There are some seasons I have it, and then there are some seasons I'm like, oh, you need to start over at zero. But I am learning, like, just to call my emotions what they are. Mm-hmm. So whatever it is, however ugly it, just call it what it is. Don't sugarcoat, don't anything. And then if I need help, seek help. There's a stigma around mental and emotional health. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we talk about it, the less stigmatized it becomes. Maybe I just need to speak with someone and talk something out. I have learned to name my emotions, and I try to encourage others as well. So there's a running joke in my house. When my husband walks in a room, and if he sees me very seriously talking on the phone, he'll say, "You're counseling." Right. So he used to say that, I'm counseling. And so I share. So, matter of fact, in the spirit of transparency, I'm not afraid to say that I have a therapist that I will check in with every 3 to 4 months or something, just as a check-in. And so I was speaking with one of my friends last week, and she's going through some things, and I've been trying to encourage her to speak with someone. And so I'm telling her things that my therapist has said, and I'm sharing that. And then I said to her, "You're going to have to start putting in on this therapist bill, sister." and she started laughing. She says, "Why should I? I'm getting all the good stuff for free." So, but, I definitely think that we have to be in tune with our emotions and be honest about it.
Thank you for normalizing that. I do think it is an important part of this journey we're all on toward relating to one another in the workplace in a more human way, whether we use the language of leadership and followership or whether we use different language for that. I wonder if anything is floating to the surface for you as we're starting to come to a close here. Any other tips you'd like to offer listeners for their own journey to integrate followership into their leading?
So I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that leadership is fluid. There are times when, a leader couldn't be in the room, but delegate to a follower role because, for instance, that person isn't chairing a committee. Mm-hmm. So I think we just have to realize the fluidity of these roles. And again, just not taking it so seriously that we begin to just make that a permanent fixture of our identity. To me, anyone who's not learning, you're stifling your growth. You're stifling your personal growth, your spiritual growth, your emotional, all of that. And so, I am on a quest for lifelong learning. Now, I will parenthetically say I do not want to have to pay tuition to learn again. I'm good.
No, great. You got enough degrees.
Yeah. I'm good. No tuition with learning. But, I enjoy learning. I enjoy learning concepts. I enjoy learning about people. And so just remember, leadership is learning. So not only are you learning about your role, but you're learning about the people you lead. I'm not saying become best friends with everybody in your organization, right? That's impossible. But just take time to learn and just don't take yourself too seriously. Like
That's the name of the episode, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Yolanda, thank you so much. Your enthusiasm is contagious, and I'm so inspired to know there are people like you out there carrying your vision out into the world. Thank you again, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. It is truly an honor, and it has been fun.
Likewise. You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music, and a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.